Okay, so today we're going to talk about browser events. So we need browser events to listen to and react on changes with JavaScript. So there are three ways to listen to events on the element. The first one is write on-click attribute in the HTML, and as a value of the attribute, put the function name, which should be in a global context. That's not actually a good way, because in this case, we should touch the HTML to add events, and also all the functions, all the handlers should be in a global context. So we're not using this way. Let's move next. The second way is to select an element button in the example and set the handler as a value of on-click property, for example, if we are listening to click. For almost each event, each element has a property with on. So, and the third way is to use add event listener. So what's the difference between this way on click, for example, and add event listener click? So the difference is that we can select the phase of capturing event to do it on capture or bubbling. We will talk about it later. And also we can add to one element for the same event, we can add several handlers. So how we can add the, how does it work, add event listener? It takes 4 arguments. 2 of them are optional. Let's take a look at the syntax. The first argument is the string. It's the name of event. It's a click in example. The second argument is a handler. So we can pass here the name of function or use arrow function, write function just right here. Okay. But you have to be careful with passing handler to add event listener, because working with the classes, for example, you can lose this. This handler takes an event object as an argument. You may see it here. We are taking event and console log event. And event has property current target, which has reference to an element we are listening event to. And keyword this will always have a reference to event current target. So here there are 2 examples. In the first one, we are passing just the name of the method. It is increment. Oh, it should be handle click. And we're using this inside of this method. This count, we're incrementing it. And using the first way, we're just putting the method name. It will be called, but this inside this method will refer to event current target. But we need this to point to class instance. We can fix it easily. Take a look at the second picture. We're just using the arrow function for to call increment, to pass it like a handler. I hope sometimes it's hard to understand, but when you start working with classes and event listeners, just remember this picture. Okay, let's move on. Every event handler passed to an event listener takes an event object as an argument. So this function will be called with event object when event happen. Let's take a look at this. So this, for example, mouse event object. For each type of events, we have different objects. For example, mouse event, keyboard event, pointer event, and so on. We have a special interface for each type of events. So the event objects has a lot of properties. You may find here an offset X, offset Y, page X, page Y, something like coordinates of the click. It has type, click, string, like here. It has a target property which refers to an element the event happened, and so on. So doing a home task, you can console event object and take a look at it closely. Yeah, the most used properties and methods of event objects you will need are event target, event current target, and the methods prevent default, stop propagation, stop immediate propagation. Okay, let's take a look at them. So event target is reference to an element which has been clicked, for example, and the current target is a reference to an element we are listening event to. So prevent default methods means that we don't want the default browser behavior to happen. For example, if you're listening to click event on the anchor, you can prevent default so browser will not go to this link, so something else can happen. And another example is a form. When you submit the form, it sends the form data, and the page will be reloaded. So event prevent default may stop the default behavior. Stop propagation, stop immediate propagation. We're going to talk about them a little bit later. And now let's talk about bubbling and capturing. So I have made a simple example. Let's take a look at the HTML. So it has main. Inside of main, we have section, and inside of section, we have button. So what happens when we click on button in the center? So the event will fire it on document in HTML, then it will be fired on body, then on main, then on section, then on button. And then event is going to bubble up. It again will be fired on section, again on main, again on body, and again on document. So let's take a look at JavaScript we have it here. So I'm selecting from the DOM the button by ID, main, by ID, section by ID. It's a handler function. I'm just going to console log event current target because we know the current target is an element we're listening event to. In the section, it will be section. In main, it will be main. And in button, it will be button. So also we have event target. So if we're clicking on button, the event target will be button only because the click happened on button. And here is the simple JavaScript. So add event listener takes the third optional argument. It's a Boolean use capture. The default is false. So what does it mean? If use capture is false, the event will be handled only on bubbling. So event handling will start when event goes down to button, and then it starts bubbling, and on bubbling we're going to listen to the event. So in this case, I suppose when I click the button, the event will be handled first on button, then on section, then on main, then on body, then on document. So we're listening to button, section, and main only. So let's take a look. I'm clicking the first button, the second section, and the third main. So let's change use capture to true. And if it is true, we're going to have event handled on its diving deep to the button. So I suppose in this case, the first event will be fired on main, then on section, then on button. Let's click. And here we are, main, section, and then button. Any questions about use capture? Okay, no questions, so we can move on. So yeah, and here are 3 different ways to listen event using add event listener. This picture is where you were passing just 2 arguments, the string of name of event and handler function. Here we are passing use capture as well. And also add event listener might take options object. It contains 3 properties, capture, once, and passive. So, okay, let's talk about them. The capture, it's like use capture. So you cannot pass use capture, and you can do it like here in an object. You can set capture property to true to catch event when it's going down. Also, there is a once property. It means that the event will be handled only once, and then event listener will be removed after the call. And passive will ignore prevent default method calling. And if you call this method in a handler, you're going to get console warning about it. Okay, let's go next. Event delegation. So just imagine that you have a table like this, 5 5 columns and 2 rows. You may have a large table like 50 columns and 100 of rows. It doesn't matter. So, and we're going to change the background of each cell to red, for example, on click. How we can do that? So we can select from DOM each column, and for each column we can add event listener. But in this way, we are going to spend the memory of the application more in 10 times because we have a separate handler for each cell. Also, as far as each event, first going deeper and then bubbling, we can use event delegation. So we can listen to the event on the whole table and changing the class list of current target. Okay, so I think we can try it. And let's comment this. And maybe this, yeah, okay. So let's create 10 buttons inside the section. I'm going to use for loop, for example. We are creating a button element. Then we are going to add inner text button. For example, let's it be index. And then we're going to append button to section. Button like this. Let's check it out. Yeah, we're having 10 buttons. And let's comment out this button. We're not going near this. Okay. So 10 buttons. And let's prepare the CSS class with a red background. Okay. It's not a good idea to write a string of color here. It's better to use a hash, but we are going to do it quickly, and that's why I'm using string. Okay, so let's add event listener to section. A listener, click, and on click I'm going to use handler function. Let's write a handler function. It is going to get event object and event target class list toggle and our prepared CSS class red. So the toggle will add the class red if it doesn't have it, and remove if it has. Okay, so let's do it this way. Click, 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 and it toggles class. Let me scale it a little bit. Maybe you cannot see it. Yeah, and it works. So here we used event delegation to use just one handler on a section to handle all the nested buttons. So any questions about event delegation? No questions. Nice. Okay, now let's come back to the previous example with event capturing and bubbling. And now let's take a look how does prevent default works and how does stop propagation work. Okay, let's see the difference between event stop propagation and stop immediate propagation. And let me do it like this. I'm going to add here another handler to button. Here actually. And event listener. Quick. Here we're going to use console log. Hello. I'm another handler. Okay, let's check how it works. So we're using use captures true. Let's change it to false. By the default, it's false, so we can remove it. Yeah. Okay. So let's now take a look. Yeah. First, we see button. This handler will be fired first. The second one will be this one. And then we're having event fired on section and then on main. So let's look like stop propagation works. On event stop propagation, it cancels the event bubbling. So the event will be handled only on button, but two another handlers will not fire at all on main and section, for example. So we need stop propagation, for example, if we have two different operations on button click and on section click, if they are nested and so on. So, okay, so let's check it one more time. It fires two handlers on button. Now let's take a look how immediate propagation works. Seems clear. Nice. Okay. I hope it's correct. Now, I suppose with one M. Okay, let's try it. Oh my God. Stop presentation. Stop immediate. Immediate. Yeah. Okay. Now let's try it. Yeah, it works. So on immediate propagation, it will cancel other handlers on this element. So this handler will not fire. Okay, we have some questions. You assign function handler to const. Is it a best practice of we as well just can use function decoration? I'm not sure it's maybe called the best practice. So it depends on the code standards used on each project. So we have, for example, several all-known code standards. One of them is, sorry, I forgot it. Do you remember the service for room rent, not booking? Airbnb standard, right? Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, the Airbnb standard prefers function expression like this, but it depends on your standard on your project. You can use function decoration or function expression, so it depends on it only. So two ways are valid, expression or declaration. I guess in specific case, we would need to write this function for each event listener. Okay. Could you please rephrase your question about event listener? Event listener, maybe you wanted to say. In the specific case, we would need to write this function for each event listener. Yeah, could you please rephrase your question? Thanks. Okay, guys, so let's move on. Yeah, that's the main difference between stop propagation and stop immediate propagation, that immediate will prevent other handlers to fire. So, yeah, okay, that was all about event delegation. Also, you have a possibility to create your own events. For example, here is the example. We're using the custom events constructor function to create our own event. It will be called my custom event. Instead of click where I want to listen, write this event. And when we want to dispatch it, we call window, for example, dispatch event. And in another part of code, we're listening this event. I mean, it's easier and cleaner to put the name than the function body for each event listener, right? So we are creating a variable, moving function to the variable, and then pass the variable or just function name to event listener to avoid to make code more readable. because if you are going to write inside event listener entire function, so just imagine that instead of this handler, we had function for 50 lines, for example, and we're going to write here 50 lines and so on and so on. So it could be hard to read this code. So that's why we're creating a variable for function and then pass it as an argument to event listener. Okay, let's back to custom events. Yeah, so you can also use it by the constructor function custom events. Okay, now let's talk about other events. For example, we have key down, key press, and key up events. What's the difference? Key down when you just when the key is pressed. Key pressed is so. Let's try like some kind of example. Let's get our button here. Okay, we don't need the button. Let's add event listener to read document. Add event listener, for example, key press. Event log event. Okay, now let me press the key D. Suppose. Okay. Yeah. And we're just this event will be fired on just pressing the key. Here we have key code. Yeah, and here is the event object, keyboard event. We're having here key code, char code. So this way we can filter just the key code we need to fire some kind of event, because you may have one handler for different keys and do different separations depending on key pressed. Okay, so let's add another. That was a key press. Listener. Key down. This. And this. Yeah. Okay, so let's move next. Mouse events. It's large enough list. So we're having here click, context menu, the right button of the mouse. So for example, on your website or application, you can replace the standard context menu by using event prevent default and replace it with your own context menu. Double click, mouse down, mouse enter, mouse leave. So mouse down if you are just pressing the button. So mouse enter when you are hovering the element. Mouse leave, mouse move over, out, mouse up. So also select, you can select some text and fire event on it. And mouse wheel, you can also listen to these events. So what is also can be popular, it's touch events. You may need them. And the pointer events. So the pointer events, it's some kind of a mix of mouse events and touch events. You can use pointer events um, to handle like mouse events and touch events, something like this. Oh, I lost my slides. Sorry. Yeah. Pointer events, it has interesting enough event object. Let's take a look at it. Oh God. Okay, well, let's find it. Event object. Interface. Yeah, here we are. So we have if interesting properties here, for example, pressure. It's a range of from 0 to 1. For example, depending on user's pressure, you can fire different operations, and that's interesting enough. Okay, let's move next. Form events. As a part of a user experience, for example, if you are adding some data to form, you expect on pressing enter, the form will be submitted. So that's why here we have a simple markup of the form. We have some kind of number input and text input, and here we have input type submit and input type reset. So if the user press the submit button, input type submit or button type submit, or user is not pressing the button and just pressing the enter on keyboard, the submit event will fire. So how we can handle it? Here you can see the submit handler. First, we prevent default to prevent sending the form somewhere, and then we can, for example, validate our form and then send it manually, make some kind of HTTP request, get a promise here, fetch or something like that. And also we can change the data before sending and so on and so forth. And the main thing I wanted to say is always listen to the submit events. Sometimes the developers are making, instead of input a button type submit, just a simple button, for example, submit, and listening to the click on this button. But in this case, when a user expects to send the form by pressing the enter key, he will not get the result. And this is the part of a user experience. Fill in the form and just press enter without clicking, without taking a mouse and clicking the submit button using mouse. And there is also a reset event on the form. On the reset, you can, for example, notify user that all the data passed in form will be removed, and the user may click OK for this notification and so on. So remember about these events and use them. Also, we have events for, okay, we have a question. If we have more submit buttons, how we specify the correct one? So for each form, you should have one submit button. If you are having several submit buttons, you may have several forms. And on each form, you may listen to submit events. Okay, so form and input events. Change event, you can use it for inputs, selects, text areas, inputs type checkbox, and so on. And there is a input event. So let me explain you the difference. The input event will fire on each key up for the text inputs value changing. And the change event will for the text inputs and number inputs will fire only when you when the element lose focus. And I suppose for checkbox elements and selects, the change in the input will work in the same way. Okay, what we have else is focus and blur. These events these events do not bubble. Remember it. So there are some events which does not bubble. The focus and blur events are not only for inputs. So for example, if you are using just the keyboard for navigation, you're using the tab and shift tab buttons to navigate between links on the website. So this link also should be in a focus state. Okay, which event you may need? It's also resize event. It fires only on window event, on window element. Yeah. So on resize, you can recalculate something or make some other operations and so on. So this is resize event only for window. Clipboard events, cut, copy, paste, and so on for other operations and other events. I put here the most interesting events and the link for the full list. The first one, visibility change event. So it's fired when you change the tab. For example, we have changed the tab and this event is fired. Here I put here a simple example. Document hidden, it means that the tab with your application is not active. And we are consoling here, browser tab is hidden and so on. And the other is for mobile devices event, orientation change. So if the user changes the orientation of the display, you can also listen to these events and work with it. So here is the link for the full list. Here's some more events. You can take a look at them, read about them, read about events which cannot bubble also. For example, here you can see the media events for audio and video text elements. On pause, we can listen the pause or play, for example. And SVG events and so on. So, okay, guys. Any questions? How to call any function when was pressed key R or F key press listener. Okay, let's try it. Let's try it maybe here. Okay, for example, let's listen to pressing R key events. And event listener. Press event. Let's check for the key code. Code stable, for example. Press any key. Let's press R. We get an 82. Event. Code. 82. Let's log R. And that's enough, I suppose. Check it. Doesn't work. Let me check event object. R code. Code. Okay. The code is 114. Let's try again. Let's make a constant for key code. R key code. Now document an event listener. Key press. Here, if event key code is equal to R key code, we're going to rest example. Okay, let's check. R pressed. Yeah. And in the same way, so instead of console log, you may have here another function which is going to do something when keyboard R is pressed, and the same construction will be we can put here another if and handle if event key code is F, and so on. Yeah, we can. Really, we can create a piano or create some kind of a game and so on. Okay, guys, can you mix pointer and mouse events? We can handle separately pointer events and mouse events, but the event names will be different. So for mouse events, for example, we have click, and also we have mouse down, and for pointer we have pointer down. So they have different names, and we have to add them differently. So create documented event listener mouse event and another add event listener with pointer event and so on. So pointer events may be useful, for example, for drag and drop. If you don't want to use the native HTML5 drag and drop, for example, in the native drag and drop, it has the picture with opacity 10%, if I'm not mistaken. If you need to replace it with another picture, you can use the pointer events and override native drag and drop and so on. Does pointer events work with mouse? Yes, they do. Pointer events work with mouse as well. How to make a key press event with, for example, Shift plus P? Okay, let's. For example, we may on key press Shift. Let me check. Maybe Shift does not supported by key press. Key press any key except Shift, Fn, or caps lock. But key down, we may use key down to. Okay, so for example, we can make the next algorithm. First, we pressing Shift. We're checking if on key down, we're checking if the key is Shift, make some Boolean variable true. On Shift up, make some Boolean false. And then on pressing another key, for example, P, we're checking if Shift press, do something. If not, skip. And how to create an event that first want us to press, for example, M, and then holding M, press A. So not all of them at once at beginning. Yeah, okay, let me show you the simple example. Okay, for example, we should have M key code. It will be, I don't know the value, let it be 42. And then we're going to have A key code. It will be 24, doesn't matter. And then we're going to listen to events, and also we're going to have a variable let m pressed to be false. Document add event listener key press. Should have event object and check if event key code equals to m key code. Oh my god. Code, then m pressed true. Okay, that will be the first handler for maybe we can use just one. Let me check. Else if, yeah, we can do it. Event key code equals to a key code. And inside of this if, we're checking if m pressed, then do something. Okay. And then we can have curly braces here and here like this. Yeah, okay. And another handler for mkey up. Event listener up. Lowercase. And press should be false. Have I answered your question about pressing different keys? Okay. That's good. Okay, guys, any more questions? I missed some break. Yeah. Okay. So, guys, the main thing you have to understand about events is event delegation and bubbling and capture. So they are the main aspects of browser events. Okay, so if there are no questions, there is one. Maybe you know anything about our next home task. Not everything. So I think you have to wait the notifications with the home task, and then you can ask me questions. So maybe in Discord, if you use it. But if I'm not mistaken, you will need to implement the cyclic menu based on keyboard events and something like this. A good place to read more about events is MDN to my mind, it's the best platform, having all specs and docs about um, browser API, DOM API, and events. So yeah, you can use MDN and some tutorial. Uh, Actually, I don't know if Learn JavaScript has an English version, but if it has, you have to read it. And the best tutorial to my mind is practice. You have to read about each event on MDN and try it by your hands. And that is going to be the best tutorial for you. And that's it probably. And you may also try to implement the application using ES6 classes with event handling and creating the elements and so on. Yeah, that's nice. It has English version. Perfect. So, okay, guys, if there are no questions, I believe we can close the call. Yeah, that's it. That's all you may know about. That's all you need to know about browser events. Another part is practice. You should uh, practice with your home task, and I will check it, provide you some feedback about how to work with events. Thank you guys for attending. So have a nice evening. Good luck with the home task.